guys, Nancy Grace have done it again. Darn it. Okay, so let me tell you what we have here. It's explosive. This is a real bombshell. This is a Nolan Wells update. Florida attorney, explosive phone evidence blows this case wide open. It's going to blow it out the park. And Nancy Grace is putting it out here. You guys have to watch this video. Nancy Grace, it's going to crack Nolan Wells' case. Honey, it's still a lot of stuff missing. The stomach organs are missing. The throat is missing. But Nancy Grace, she going to crack this case. Check.
But I just watched a video. It is midnight. I just finished a workout and something clicked. I watched a video that made something else click that I watched earlier today, and that's this. The kid calls for a tow. The woman, Vicky, calls the captain to do the tow. And she says, this kid's grandfather, this Jerry Ackerman, is a member. Before she says the guy's name, the captain says, Jerry? I just got off the phone with him. I literally just got off the phone with him. And he said that they don't need a tow, that they're fine. So, hold on. The grandson is calling for the tow simultaneous to the grandfather calling the captain of the towboat saying they don't need a tow before the captain gets a call from Vicky. When did the kid call the grandfather? While the boat is sinking? He called grandfather for what could grandfather possibly do for you? He called the grandfather for advice. What the fuck do we do? This kid's grandfather said, you got to make a fucking trail. That you tried to get help. There was an accident. Something happened. The boat's going under. Okay, it's a boat. Call. So there is a recording of you trying to get help for something, and we'll figure it out later. I think that their story has evolved. But that was what the grandfather thought of then, to create a timestamp in history of what was happening, what they were doing, where they were, and that there was a completely different emergency happening, nothing to do with Nolan, okay? And the grandfather did not want to get billed for this tow, and obviously didn't want the captain to go and happen upon whatever the fuck's going on. So he preempts the emergency call to the captain and says, hey, you might get a call, but they don't need it. I walked them through it. It's fine. It was an alibi advised by the grandfather. You remember the Murdoch documentary series? You remember that, right? You remember when his son killed a girl in a boating accident, right? And how they completely jumped into action immediately without skipping a fucking beat to do a cover up. They all get back, they all wipe all of in unison, all wipe their social media. Why would you have to do that? Well, why the fuck would you have to do that? If you left him on the island, why are you deleting all of your social media? Another thing.
I couldn't imagine that they want to get underage drinking on camera. So what they had articulated to me that it wasn't abnormal for people not to snap and not to do a lot of pictures and things like that because they were focused on.
But you
being
told me
off of the
they
mainland.
showed you pictures and videos.
Yeah,
So
but
they
it's
did
not
take
uploaded.
pictures and videos.
No. It's not. It's not a lot of pictures, and they weren't uploaded.
Shut the f up, Brandon, because he is spinning his wheels here, trying to convince Nancy that the boys were telling the truth. They let me see their videos on their phones. And that, of course, they wouldn't want to film themselves drinking. They all film themselves drinking. No, but they wouldn't upload it onto Snap. Here's why he just f***ed up. The mother, one of the first days after this all happened, the mother said, we wanted his phone because he had snapped and we wanted to see the snaps that he had snapped. And the snaps were deleted. So she had seen his snaps. The whole point of Snapchat is that you are able to post things that maybe you don't want a record of, but at least everyone knew you were having fun.
He was, I was about to say, he was the peacemaker of our friend group. I mean, anytime anybody had beef over somebody, over a girl or whatever, he would go over there and start talking to him. He's like, man, I think this guy's actually pretty cool.
Yeah, this guy's
I don't think we should. I think we should become friends with this guy.
Yeah.
And lo and behold, we would somehow become friends with the dude, even though he's getting with one of our other buddies' exes or whatever. But yeah, he was.
If your son goes out on a boat, especially with a group of black kids, and doesn't come back, but they all come back safely, and then those people lawyer up, they deactivate their social media accounts, and they say that your son did not bring his cell phone with them. You know, like would that make sense to you? It doesn't. Logically, it doesn't make sense, right?
But I believe one took a polygraph, and from what was told to me, that they all passed.
Nancy, my clients have not taken a polygraph test.
Excuse me. Everybody is now pointing out that Charles and TMZ are now backpedaling on everything they said, because Charles was recently being interviewed, and I think it was by Don Lemon, and he's like, yeah, it's odd that they're going off on Officer Race Batum Tatum's podcast. It's odd that they did this. It's odd that they did that. But TMZ, you have been the ones supporting these young men's PR crusade this entire time. So why now are you finally flip-flopping? Is it because all of the backlash you've been getting for reporting on this so incorrectly and favoring one side over the other? Because every time Harvey was on there, he said, oh yeah, we've corroborated the footage with them on the CTO call. And then when Trent Out Loud, shout out to my man says Trent Out Loud said, where is the metadata? Where is the META? Where is the META, son? We need to see it all day, son. Where is it? Where's the metadata? And Harvey's like, oh yeah, we just believe them. So I'm glad TMZ is backpedaling, but you guys should have been on this from day one, because one thing about TMZ, we all respected you on that celebrity tip.
There's video of the boat leaving Horn Island that day. Nobody disputes that. What there isn't, what nobody has ever produced in 6 weeks, is a single second of footage showing that same boat or anyone on it actually coming back. Tonight, we're going to sit with that gap, because it's real, it's confirmed, and it's never been explained. We're also going to do something with the 6 o'clock witness claim that almost nobody covering this case has actually done. Bring in an actual trial attorney and cross-examine it, using the real legal standards for eyewitness identification. Distance, lighting, whether anyone had been drinking, whether anything blocked the view. Once you actually apply those questions to the footage being used to support this claim, it stops looking anywhere near as solid as it's been presented. And we're going to clear something up tonight that's been badly misrepresented: Nolan's own phone, and whether his family has actually been cooperating with turning it over. What we found isn't what you've been told. There's a real timeline here, with real dates, and it tells a very different story than the family won't hand it over. We're also going to ask a direct, simple question that a Florida attorney raised this week, and nobody's had a good answer to yet. If there's no criminal investigation happening, why is there a grand jury? There's one more thread we want you thinking about all night, because once you actually lay it out step by step, it stops making sense. Warren calls Javon, not Christine directly, Javon, specifically to get Christine's phone number. So ask yourself, if Warren needed Nolan's own mother's number, wouldn't Javon naturally ask why? Wouldn't that mean Javon already knew something was wrong before Christine ever called him herself? But the timeline says Christine had to call Javon and Tashima afterward to tell them Nolan was missing, which only makes sense if Javon didn't already know. Both of those can't be true at the same time. Somebody's timeline has a hole in it. And while we're on Javon, he's the one who said it wasn't normal for Nolan to leave his phone behind that day. Fair point. Except Javon left his own phone on that same boat, that same day too. We want your honest take on that one. Every one of these threads is real, every one is contested, and every single one deserves to be laid out honestly instead of shouted past.
These witnesses know Nolan. They've known him for a long time. They were able to make a positive ID. And they told that to investigators. They told them that from the very start.
What witnesses? Where? Who, what, where, why, and when? That is a renowned trial lawyer named Tyler Cox, and he is representing the acquaintances of Nolan's that took him to Horn Island on their boat, the Triton. Curious, we've seen, hey, let's pull up that video, control room, of everyone getting on the boat before they went to Horn Island. It's very interesting, evidentiarily. Okay, here we go. This was from the Officer Tatum show, and you're about to see people. There they are down at the right. And there's actual video of people see the boat at about 1 o'clock. Oh, there we go. Excellent shot, guys. People are getting on, people getting off. And it keeps going to where you see everybody that got on the boat. But here's my big question tonight, before I can even get to the alleged witnesses that Tyler Cox is telling us about. Dave Mack, joining me, Crime Stories investigative reporter. Can I see the video again, please? Dave Mack, I'm seeing everybody preparing the Triton to go out, preparing to go out. In this shot, they're down at about 3 o'clock. Okay, keep looking. 3 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 3 o'clock. And then suddenly you switch to a different camera. There you go. That's the boat. So, Dave Mack, where is the evidence? Where is the video of the boat? Is that Nolan right there? Walking along the light blue shorts, and he at that time had on a white shirt. I think that's Nolan right there. Dave Mack, where is the evidence, the video evidence of them coming back?
Nancy, we have not seen evidence of them coming back.
Let's start with something that isn't a theory, isn't an enhancement, isn't anyone's interpretation of a blurry frame. It's a simple, confirmed fact about what does and doesn't exist. That's Nancy Grace asking her own investigative reporter directly, on air, and getting a direct answer. Real footage exists of the Triton preparing to leave the dock that morning. People loading up, boats getting ready, a full visual record of departure. Somewhere in that same footage, there's a figure in light blue shorts and a white shirt, bent over near the boat around 3 o'clock, that Nancy herself identifies on air as likely being Nolan. What doesn't exist, confirmed directly by a crime reporter who's been tracking this case closely, is a single second of footage showing any of it coming back. Not the Triton, not either of the other 2 boats that caravanned out to Horn Island that same morning. 3 boats went out. Dave Mack's own words, there are different stories about when each one actually made it back, and not one frame of video confirming any of them. Sit with the actual time frame here, because it matters. This isn't a gap from last week. It has now been over 30 days since Nolan died, And in all that time, across every panel, every interview, every piece of footage that's circulated in this case, the departure clip is still the only visual evidence anyone has ever produced. 30+ days, and nothing showing the return has ever surfaced. Not from investigators, not from the family's team, not from the friend group, not from anyone. Here's the question worth asking directly, and it's simple. Why would a camera capture the boats going out, but not capture them coming back? This isn't casual bystander footage that only exists if someone happened to be filming at the right second. This is dock and marina security coverage, the kind of system that runs continuously, on a loop, regardless of what's happening in front of it. It doesn't turn on for departures and turn off for returns. It doesn't know which direction matters more. If a camera was running and caught 8 people loading onto a boat that morning, that same camera, on the same loop, should have caught whatever came back to that same stretch of water later that day, unless something specific happened to stop it from recording, or to the footage after it was recorded. That's exactly why maybe nothing else was ever caught doesn't hold up as an easy explanation here, the way it might for a one-off phone video. A continuously recording system doesn't selectively capture boats going out and skip them coming back. Something has to actually explain that asymmetry. Either the return happened somewhere outside that camera's specific field of view, or the footage exists and simply hasn't been released, or it existed and has since been lost. That leaves a few real possibilities, and none of them require a conspiracy to be true. Most commercial security systems cycle automatically, typically somewhere between 2 and 4 weeks before older recordings get overwritten to make room for new ones. We're now past that window. If a formal preservation request went out early, in the first days, before the system cycled, the footage should still be sitting somewhere, recoverable today. If that request didn't go out in time, it may already be gone for good, not through anyone's intent, just a system doing exactly what it's built to do. On a schedule, nobody paused for this case. Do the actual math on that against the real timeline here, because it matters more than it might seem. 30+ days is already past most standard retention windows for ordinary commercial security systems. That means if nobody formally requested and preserved this footage within roughly the first 2 to 4 weeks after Nolan's death, there's a real, mechanical chance it's already been recorded over, not because anyone chose to destroy it, but because that's simply what these systems are designed to do on a loop, indefinitely, until someone tells them to stop. The window for this specific question to still have a clean answer may already be closing, if it hasn't closed already. It's also worth naming the more mundane possibility fairly, because a real investigation into this gap wouldn't just assume the worst. It's entirely possible the camera covering the departure simply doesn't have a field of view that extends to wherever these 3 boats actually docked on return. Marinas often have multiple docking areas, and a camera angled to catch one stretch of water doesn't necessarily cover another, even at the same facility. If the boats came back to a different slip, a different ramp, or even a different marina entirely than where they launched from, that alone could fully explain why departure footage exists and return footage doesn't, without requiring anything to have gone missing at all. There's a second layer worth naming, because it compounds the first. This isn't a gap in footage for one boat. It's a gap for 3, each with its own separate account of when it actually got back. If even one of those 3 boats had confirmable return footage, that alone would meaningfully narrow the timeline this whole case has been arguing about for over a month now. Not having it for any of the 3 means every account of the return trip currently rests entirely on someone's word, with 0 independent visual anchor behind any of it. Here's the fair counter, held honestly against the same standard we've applied to everything else in this case. It's possible a request already went out early, the footage was already pulled and reviewed privately, and investigators simply haven't announced it because it didn't add anything beyond what they already knew. Law enforcement doesn't narrate every piece of evidence it's ruled in or out. But that explanation has the exact same outward appearance as the footage never having been requested at all. Both look like total silence from where the public sits, 30+ days in. The only thing that actually tells them apart is someone with real authority saying which one it is, and as of tonight, nobody has. What actually resolves this isn't complicated. Marina operators and dock owners either still have footage from that stretch of water on July 4th, or they can confirm it's already been overwritten. That's a simple, answerable question, not a theory. An actual yes or no, a formal records request could settle directly, before whatever window is left closes for good. Worth noting too, the departure footage we do have didn't come from an official release. It surfaced through the Officer Tatum Show, an independent platform, not a law enforcement press conference. If the only footage the public has seen from that entire day, over a month later, came from outside the investigation entirely, that raises its own quiet question about what official channels have actually released, on their own initiative, this whole time. None of this proves anyone's hiding anything. A camera pointed the wrong way, a retention window that quietly closed before anyone asked, a request that's already been made privately and simply never announced. All of that is real and possible, and we're not going to pretend otherwise, just to make this section land harder. But 30+ days is a long time for the most objective category of evidence in this entire case, to stay this completely one-sided, showing everyone leaving and nobody coming home. If you were near that marina that evening and have footage of your own, that's exactly the kind of tip that could move this case forward. Worth sending in.
Wait a minute. Time out. Those boys just said that who left their phone on their boat in the case of 18-year-old Nolan Wells and had to meet them back at the dock and wait for them in order for them to get their phone? Let's listen to it together and I'll be right back.
5 other people that also left their phones on the boat, and we had to wait at the boat launch for them to come and pick them up, including Javon. I mean, Javon left his phone on our boat.
For one, I found it very strange that they looked at each other at that precise moment. But for two, I feel like they trying to throw you under that bus, Javon. You don't see the way that they just said your name right there, and they didn't say nobody else's name inside of who else left their phone on the boat, and I'm pretty sure they know everybody else that left their phone on the boat, but the only person name that they just threw under the bus right there was Javon's name. But here's the thing. I know that them name dropping Javon right there, and this is just my opinion, probably makes them feel like they just did something right there. But the only thing that they just did in my mind is make everybody even more suspicious, and I'll tell everybody why. In order for everybody to follow, I have to go back to the beginning, everybody. We have to go back to the original story that was allegedly told by Javon Williams after the 4th of July when they did the article originally on Javon Williams. Now, the original story from Javon Williams allegedly to that article when he first did that article when they first found 18-year-old Nolan Wells on Monday, July 6th, Javon Williams had allegedly stated to them that him and 18-year-old Nolan Wells had put their phones together on the boat that 18-year-old Nolan Wells rode out there on because they saw each other almost immediately once they arrived to the island due to the fact that Javon Williams said that he was scheduled to be able to ride with Nolan Wells out there to the island, but their boat ended up being too full that Javon Williams ended up needing to ride a different boat out there to the island.
Let's actually play detective with this one, because it's not built on a theory, it's built on comparing what Javon himself has said at different points against what the friend group is saying now. Start with Javon's own original account, given right after Nolan was found. He said he and Nolan had planned to ride out on the same boat together, but both boats ended up too full, so he rode a different one. He said he left Horn Island around 4 that afternoon, and that when he left, he saw Nolan with a girl, chatting with a group of friends. And critically, in that original account, he said he and Nolan had put their phones together on the boat Nolan actually rode out on. Now compare that to what he's reportedly said since, across different platforms, at different times. By multiple accounts, including one attributed to his own mother clarifying a comment, the details of exactly where his phone was and how he got it back have shifted. Different specifics about the location, different framing about the sequence of events. We want to be careful here, because we can't independently verify every social media comment attributed to him or his family, and we're not going to treat unverified screenshots as confirmed fact. But if his own account of a simple, factual detail, where his phone was, how he got it back, has genuinely changed multiple times, that's worth noting the same way we'd note it for anyone else in this case. It's worth being precise about why a shifting detail like this deserves attention without automatically meaning something sinister. Where you physically left a phone and how you got it back isn't the kind of detail memory typically distorts under stress, the way a fast-moving, emotional sequence of events might. Timing, who said what, the order of a chaotic evening, those are exactly the kinds of details that get genuinely fuzzy under pressure, and we've made that point fairly throughout this entire case. A phone's physical location is a much simpler, more concrete fact. It's the kind of detail that usually stays consistent even when everything else around it gets hazy, precisely because it doesn't require piecing together a sequence. It's just, where was the object? If that specific detail has shifted more than once, it's fair to hold it to a slightly different standard than we'd hold a timestamp or a sequence of events to. One version of this, attributed to Javon's own mother clarifying a comment, is worth walking through carefully, because the specific wording matters. She reportedly corrected someone directly, saying what actually happened was that Javon made it back to the dock, and then the boat arrived, and that's when he got his phone back. Read that sequence closely. Javon at the dock first, waiting, and the boat, carrying his phone, arriving afterward. That's a specific, orderable sequence, not a vague summary, and it lines up, at least in shape, with exactly what the friend group's own recent account describes. People arriving at the boat launch and having to wait there for others to come collect their phones. Here's the detective work that actually matters, independent of any of those shifting details. The friend group's own recent account says 5 people left their phones on the boat, and that they had to wait at the boat launch for those people to come collect them, naming only one of those 5 specifically, Javon. If Javon's original account is accurate, and his phone really was on the same boat as Nolan's, then the moment Javon showed up at that dock to collect his own phone is also the moment the group would have been standing there with Nolan's phone still in hand, waiting on a boat that Nolan himself wasn't on. That's the actual question worth asking, and it doesn't require speculating about anyone's honesty to ask it. If multiple people were showing up to that same dock, one at a time, to collect their own phones, and everyone eventually did, except Nolan, why didn't that specific moment register as the first real red flag? Not hours later. Right then, at the dock, when the group would have been holding a phone whose owner still hadn't shown up to claim it, the same way everyone else had. There's a second layer to this, worth connecting directly to something we raised earlier tonight. If Javon really was standing at that same dock, reunited with his own phone, at roughly the same window when the group still had Nolan's phone in hand, and no sign of Nolan himself, that's also the natural moment somebody should have thought to act. Not hours later, once panic had already set in, but right then, while everyone was still gathered in one place with all the pieces actually present at once. Instead, based on everything we've walked through in this case, the actual outreach to Christine came later that night, through an indirect path. Warren calling Javon specifically to get her number, rather than anyone picking up the phone the moment the group realized Nolan was the one person who hadn't shown up to claim his. We want to be fair about the ordinary explanation because it's a real one. A busy, chaotic dock at the end of a long holiday on the water. Multiple people arriving at different times. Everyone tired. Everyone assuming the next person would show up eventually. That's exactly the kind of environment where a red flag can get missed in the moment. Not because anyone's hiding anything, but because normal human attention doesn't work like a checklist. People don't always connect "everyone else is here" to "someone specific isn't" in real time, especially when there's already an assumption in place. In this case, that Nolan intended to make his own way back separately, with Katie, or with someone else's group entirely. But that explanation gets harder to lean on the more people were actually present for that exact moment. If this was one or two people quietly swapping a phone in a quiet parking lot, a missed connection is easy to understand. Nobody's specifically watching for a pattern. If this was a whole group, standing at a dock, watching person after person come collect their phone while one specific phone sat there unclaimed, that's a different scale of nobody noticed. Group settings are usually exactly where this kind of gap gets caught faster, not slower. More eyes, more people, cross-referencing who's actually accounted for. It's fair to ask why concern didn't build the same way it eventually did just a few hours later, once the group had already dispersed and reconvened separately. There's also a fair, practical possibility worth naming honestly. It's entirely plausible the group's understanding at that exact moment was still Nolan's with Katie's group, he'll get a ride separately, meaning the missing phone at the dock wouldn't have registered as urgent at all, because nobody in that moment believed Nolan needed his phone back from them specifically. If that assumption was firmly in place, waiting at the dock with an unclaimed phone wouldn't feel alarming in the moment. It would just feel like one more loose end to sort out later, the same as anyone's forgotten item after a long day. That's a genuinely reasonable read, and it's worth holding seriously alongside the harder question. It's worth stepping back and naming exactly what makes this specific gap different from most of the other contradictions we've covered in this case. Most of what we've walked through elsewhere involves competing accounts of things people said. Words, phrasing, who told who what. This is different. This is a gap in action, not words. A moment where, by the group's own description of events, several specific facts were all physically present in the same place at the same time. Nolan's phone, Javon's phone, a boat that had just come in without Nolan on it, and a group of people standing there waiting. Whatever anyone actually said to each other in that moment is less important than what didn't happen next. Nobody, apparently, connected those pieces out loud, in real time, in a way that's ever been described publicly. That's the actual detective-grade question sitting underneath every version of this story, regardless of which specific account of Javon's phone turns out to be the accurate one. Verdict: Javon's own account of his phone has reportedly shifted across different tellings, which is worth noting the same way we'd flag it for anyone else, without treating unverified social media comments as proof, since a physical detail like phone location tends to be one of the more stable facts in anyone's memory of a chaotic day. The more solid, detective-grade question is the dock moment itself. If the group's own account of everyone came to collect their phone is accurate, that moment deserves a direct explanation for why Nolan's absence didn't register as urgent right then, rather than becoming urgent only later that night, even though a genuinely reasonable explanation, resting on the assumption Nolan was already safe with someone else, is available too. If you were standing at that dock, watching everyone else's phone get claimed one at a time, at what point would that have started to feel wrong to you?
That's from the Officer Tatum Show. Susan Hendricks joining me, veteran, investigative journalist, author of Down the Hill, My Descent into the Double Murder in Delphi. What witnesses? I understand that there's video and witnesses. One places him there at 5, one places him there at 6. Significance, the Triton, and we can show this by GPS. They are right about this, left Horn Island around 4:30. So if he is spotted, and you can confirm to me that he is spotted there at 5 or 6, if that video has a timestamp on it, and I can corroborate that, or I can corroborate the witnesses weren't drunk. Hey, let's see that video control room again of Nolan bent over, and all you can see is his blue trunk right there. Now, that's not a very good eyewitness right there, okay? Do I think that's him? Yeah, I do. I do think that's Nolan. But I would tear that up in court. Tear it to shreds. There's all sorts of... You know what? Hold on, Susan Hendricks. Greg Morse joining me, veteran trial lawyer, founder of Morse Legal. He's in the Southern District of Florida, former West Palm Beach public defender, and author of The Untested. Greg, in Florida, as in Georgia, as in this jurisdiction of Mississippi, the code, the official code of Mississippi, annotated, lays out how you establish or cross-examine, same thing, same criteria, an eyewitness, such as, I memorized them. How far were you away from the witness? From the target. What was the lighting? Do you wear glasses? Were you wearing them that night? Were you inebriated? Had you smoked pot? How can you prove that to me? Did anything obstruct your view? Was it daytime or nighttime? What time of the day was it? What were the conditions? You go on and on and on. You can rattle them off, right? I know you can. So
absolutely.
How do I know the eyewitness can't identify anything except the back of his legs, like in that video?
Well, that's the thing. There's no details about any identification. It's just a broad statement that other people saw Nolan after the boat left. The video you just showed shows from a view from behind of someone bending over. Did the person have sunglasses on? Were they familiar with who they were actually looking at and identifying? How much had they drank during the day? It was a party scene. That's what usually these boat spots are. There's one by me in West Palm Beach, very similar setup called Peanut Island. So most people also, right, they don't think something's important until after the fact. They're just going about their day, notice people walking by. So from what you showed, that's not a very strong identification from that position, but there's no details.
While I've got you, Greg Morse, let me throw another question at you. And look, I'm not wearing a prosecution or a defense hat. As you know, I'm a crime victim. I would say I'm coming at it from that angle. But I was very disturbed, Greg, when I got wind that there is no criminal investigation. It's been said over and over and over. Why not? We don't know how he died. For instance, if he did have water in his lungs, okay, maybe he did drown. But how did he get in the water? Did he fall in the water? Was somebody, wrestling with him in the water and they held him down? They went, oh, my stars, I killed him and left? Did he hit his head? Well, there's a lot more to it than saying, oh, yeah, he drowned. How can someone state there is no criminal investigation? I understand a grand jury is about to be convened. That doesn't mean there's a crime, but doesn't that suggest to you a grand jury inside the Superior Courthouse, inside the district attorney's office, would suggest there is a criminal investigation?
Well, it would potentially lead someone to believe that, yeah, a criminal investigation was undergoing. However, when we look at how this has played out over the last 6 weeks, how law enforcement has acted, they haven't seized Nolan Wells's phone at this point. In a criminal investigation, law enforcement's going to use those tools to get this information. So this could just be a drowning. I'm sitting down, and this could just be a drowning. And that's why they're looking at it that way, because nothing's told them it's
yet.
But everything's not a crime. It doesn't have to be investigated as a crime.
You're still talking. We've already established that. Here's the other, you know what? I'm going to let you think about what you just said. I'm going to go to Jeff Shetler joining us. Guys, this is a special guest joining us out of Edisto Island, South Carolina. Former police K-9 handler, author of 5 books. Last one, 2 weeks to operational tracking. I like this one, Red Dog Rising, K-9 trailing, the straightest path, tactical tracker teams, the Tao of trailing. He is at GAK9.com. Question, I get this a lot from the viewers, so you can put it to rest. How long does a person have to be dead before a cadaver dog will pick up on that scent?
Well, honestly, a dog's going to pick up on the live or dead scent as soon as they're out there. So the time frame, from hours to a day or so is really not a big deal. It doesn't matter what type of dog you have that's looking for humans. Within that first 24 hours, either type of dog, a live find or a deceased person dog, is going to be viable. They're going to pick up on anything that's there. The big issue that we have here is primarily the contamination. After the fact, if the dog was placed at the scene initially to search for our victim, then the chances are the success rate would actually be pretty good. The island is very, very small. There's not a lot of hiding places. There's not a lot of places he could go. On the other hand, inside the water might be a different story. We have tide issues and everything else that are occurring there.
So you bring in a scent dog. I would assume you bring in a scent dog first. But the issue with that, in my mind, probatively, like what can I use? How can I use that in trial? What's it going to prove for me? I already know Nolan was on the boat to start with. So, of course, the dog is going to pick up Nolan's scent on the boat. That's not hard to figure out. So I know a scent dog is going to pick up on that. But a cadaver dog. What should have been done immediately with a cadaver dog? And I'm putting this out there not to say woulda, coulda, shoulda. Maybe it happened and we haven't been informed.
2 threads tonight, and both of them get resolved with more precision than they've gotten anywhere else covering this case. Because both of them, it turns out, actually have real answers once you look closely enough, the way an actual detective would insist on before accepting either one at face value. Start with the 6 o'clock witness claim, because this week it finally got the treatment it should have gotten from the beginning. An actual trial attorney applying the real legal standard for eyewitness identification, instead of just repeating whoever sounds most confident. Attorney Tyler Cox's own framing has been absolute. 2 reliable, credible witnesses who've known Nolan for years made a positive identification, no chance of a mistake. A detective doesn't accept no chance of a mistake as a finding. That's a conclusion. A detective's job is to go back and test the process that produced it. That's exactly what happened next, and it's worth walking through like actual casework, because that's what it was. Florida trial attorney Greg Morris laid out the real legal criteria used across Mississippi, Florida, and Georgia alike to establish or cross-examine an eyewitness identification, and he rattled them off from memory, the way a working trial lawyer actually does in a courtroom, not the way a commentator recites a talking point. How far away was the witness from the person they're identifying? What was the lighting like? Were they wearing glasses, and were they actually wearing them in that moment? Had they been drinking or smoking anything? Was anything obstructing the view? Was it day or night? What were the actual physical conditions on the ground? That's not a rhetorical list. Every single one of those questions is the kind of thing a detective building an actual case file would need answered before treating an identification as solid enough to build on. None of them have been answered publicly for either of these 2 witnesses. Not one. Then they applied those exact questions to the one piece of footage actually available, and it fell apart under the weight of its own case file. The clip in question shows someone bent over, seen only from behind, with nothing visible except the back of a pair of blue trunks. Susan Hendricks said it plainly. That's not a strong eyewitness position at all. Greg Morris went further, walking through what's actually missing from it, piece by piece, the way you'd walk through a case file with real gaps in it. No details about sunglasses, no confirmation the person was genuinely familiar with who they were looking at. No information about how much anyone had actually been drinking that day, at what he called, accurately, a party scene. The same kind of setting he's seen firsthand at a similar boat spot near his own home in Florida. His own conclusion, stated as directly as a trial lawyer states things. From that specific position, that's not a strong identification, and in an actual courtroom, it's exactly the kind of testimony he'd tear apart on cross-examination. Here's the actual case file logic underneath why this matters beyond just one clip. No chance they made a mistake is a closed conclusion. A detective doesn't get to close a case on a conclusion that hasn't survived its own supporting questions. Once the standard identification criteria get applied to this specific piece of evidence, the confident, absolute framing doesn't hold up the way it was presented. That doesn't mean the sighting never happened. It means the certainty attached to it is stronger than the actual case file currently supports. And a detective would keep this thread open, not closed, until those specific gaps get filled. Now, the phone, and this is where actual dates exist, which means this isn't a matter of impression anymore. This is a timeline a detective can build directly from the record. On July 15th, Nolan's family met directly with the Jackson County DA's office. According to the family's own team, specific terms were discussed and agreed to at that meeting. A joint, one-time examination of Nolan's phone, with the DA's office, the family's independent forensic team, and possibly the FBI, all present together, all working from the same extracted data. The family's specific, stated concerns were laid out plainly in that same meeting. Chain of custody, who would actually have access to the extracted data, preservation of the evidence itself, and when the phone would ultimately be returned to them, since it's described as the last thing they have belonging to their son. Here's the gap a detective would flag immediately. After that July 15th meeting, there was no follow-up from the DA's office at all, for nearly a month, until August 12th. On that date, the DA's office sent the family a demand letter giving them 48 hours to turn the phone over. The family was out of town at the time. Separately, and this appears to be an earlier instance of the exact same pattern, the family has also described receiving a prior demand giving them just 24 hours, while they were specifically at the National Association of Black Journalists Conference in Georgia, a professional commitment, not evasion. Their response, both times, tracked the same shape. We agreed to a joint process on July 15th. We are not hiding this phone, and we can make ourselves available with reasonable notice. Any day, provided we're given roughly 24 hours to arrange it. Do the actual math on that timeline the way a detective would, because the pattern matters more than any single date on its own. A near month of total silence, followed not by a scheduling conversation, but by a hard deadline. Twice. Each time landing while the family happened to be away. That's not one missed connection. That's a repeated pattern, and a detective doesn't treat a repeated pattern the same way they'd treat a single, isolated miscommunication. A demand letter giving 24 or 48 hours notice, sent while the recipient is already known to be traveling, doesn't leave a realistic window to comply. By the time the letter is even received and read, a meaningful portion of that window may already be gone before anyone's had the chance to act on it. We want to say this as directly as the source material does, because it deserves to be said plainly. The same way a detective closing out a suspect's alibi would state a conclusion once the facts actually support it. The family's stated requirements, chain of custody, data access limits, evidence preservation, a return timeline, are not obstruction. They are the standard, ordinary components of any properly documented forensic examination, the exact same safeguards we walked through in detail in the last part of this video. Wanting those specific things confirmed before handing over the last physical object connected to your own son isn't resistance. It's precisely what any family in this exact position should be asking for, and a detective reviewing this case file would recognize it as reasonable, not evasive. There's also a real, documented reason this specific caution makes sense, independent of anything particular to this case. The Ellen Greenberg case was raised directly as a comparison, a case where a crime scene was professionally cleaned before it was ever properly processed, where video evidence meant to prove nothing was taken ended up lost after being handed over to police, and where a computer removed from the scene was never examined at all. Nobody's claiming that's what's happening here. What that comparison actually demonstrates, case file to case file, is that evidence mishandling is a real, documented risk that's happened in cases far less contested than this one, which is exactly why a family in Nolan's position asking for documented safeguards rather than blind trust isn't paranoia. It's a reasonable response to a risk that's already played out against other families before them. Verdict: closing this thread the way an actual case file would close it. The 6 o'clock witness claim doesn't survive the real legal standard for eyewitness reliability once it's properly applied, not disproven, but far weaker than the no chance of a mistake framing suggests. And the gaps in it are specific, nameable, and still open. The phone cooperation question has a real, dated, documented answer. An agreement reached July 15th. Silence for nearly a month, then 2 separate short-notice demand letters, both landing while the family was traveling. That's not a case file that supports the family won't cooperate. It's a case file that supports a process agreed to once and not honored the way it was supposed to be since. Between the witness claim and the phone timeline, which one changes your read on this case more?
If you were the family of Nolan Wells, would you just be blindly turning over that cell phone after they promised a joint investigation? I'm going to take a shot in the dark here and say that you probably would not turn over that cell phone, especially when the district attorney for Jackson County, Mississippi, specifically said, "We will offer a joint investigation with our investigators and you as the family, and we will dissect and extract any information on that phone to confirm if any at all information has in fact been destroyed." But you guys saw that in a legal document sent on August 11th, that joint investigation logistics have not occurred yet. They have not reached out to the family yet to say, hey, these are the days that work. Now, I know social media and I know the public are running around with this saying they are not cooperating. No, they're cooperating, but they're doing something intelligent, saying, we're not just going to hand over the phone. You promised us a joint investigation. Well, we want you to make good on your word. When will that joint investigation and cell phone extraction actually occur? When we know, we'll be there and we will physically hand over the phone. But not until then. That's not cooperating. That's not obstruction of justice. That is the family waiting for the district attorney to make good on her word.
The phone in the Nolan Wells case. I have a message directly to DA Angel Myers McGrath from a former prosecutor who did the same job you did, 30 years criminal trial experience, certified criminal trial lawyer, former head county prosecutor. Please listen carefully. This phone issue is getting out of hand. Nobody knows what to believe because you keep refusing, as I've said previously, to do proper public relations. Now, supposedly, there's a letter out there that says you agreed in July to have the phone examined with the experts from the family at a specific location and in a specific way, and that they are ready, willing, and able, and gave 4 dates this week where they would be willing to surrender that phone for examination. Now, I've been involved in things like this, so I don't know what's been said or hasn't been said, but I'll say this. The only story that we're listening to is that from Nolan Wells' family. And when they send you a letter and you don't respond and correct that letter, then we can only presume rightly that what's in that letter is correct. So the question becomes, if you had an agreement in July, why is it not being honored? There are accounts that you have demanded that the phone just be turned over in violation of that agreement. And that is not a good thing. thing. Not a good look. I can tell you from the commentary on the posts that I've had that your constituency out there in Mississippi does not trust law enforcement and does not trust this investigation. Your continued failure to update the community on any misinformation, if there is misinformation, or say, for example, if this agreement is not what the agreement was, then you need to get out there and you need to let the public know. Now, Stop with this thing that you don't compromise investigations about speaking about them. I've addressed this before. You are not compromising an investigation by correcting the record. You are making sure the public has an understanding, so we can only presume what's been written by Mr. Crump and his team is accurate. That phone is vital to any grand jury presentation. If you don't get that phone and you don't download it, then you are going to look like a bum no matter what it is that you do, and nobody will ever trust the investigation. To be honest with you, I wouldn't trust it either. That phone is vital. There is allegations that there's destruction of evidence that's on that phone, and we need to see what's on it and what's not on it. And for the rest of the folks that are out there, understand, they're not going to be going through the phone picture by picture, page by page. This is downloaded into a computer program called Celebrate, and from there, there's extractions that are done, mirroring of the phone, and then both sides can be confident they have all of the information. There's nothing wrong with that. Now, DA, I can hear you say, well, we're going to be setting a precedent that everybody thinks that they have a right to have their people there when they examine the phone. Well, you know what? I don't know, and I don't care. If you agree to that in this particular situation, we'll look at it like a one-off, but the community, me, everyone out there, and certainly the victim's family need to know it's been done in the right way. So
This part is built around one specific, credentialed voice saying something that deserves to be heard in full before we break it down. A former head county prosecutor, 30 years of criminal trial experience, speaking directly, by name, to District Attorney Angel Myers McElrath. Let's start with the actual legal logic underneath his message, because it's sharper than it might sound at first. His core argument isn't about who's right in the underlying dispute. It's about a basic principle of public communication that a prosecutor, in his professional experience, doesn't get to ignore forever. If the family's legal team sends a formal letter claiming an agreement was reached in July, and that letter goes unanswered, uncorrected, unaddressed, the public isn't being unreasonable by presuming the letter's account is accurate. Silence, in that specific context, isn't neutral. It functions as agreement by default, whether or not that was ever the DA's intention. Now let's play detective with that logic ourselves, because it holds up. A formal legal letter is not the same as an offhand social media claim. It's a document, sent through actual legal channels, making a specific, factual assertion that an agreement existed, that specific dates were offered, that the family's side has been ready and willing to proceed. If that assertion were inaccurate, the straightforward, obvious response would be a formal correction, stating plainly what the actual agreement was or wasn't. As of this broadcast, according to this same commentator, that correction never came. That's not proof the letter is accurate, but it is exactly the kind of gap a real investigator would flag immediately. A specific, checkable claim, made formally, met with silence rather than either confirmation or denial. Here's the distinction he draws that we think is the single most important point in this entire segment, and it's worth repeating in our own words because it cuts through a talking point that's been used throughout this entire case. There's a real difference between compromising an active investigation and simply correcting a factual claim about a scheduling agreement. Declining to discuss evidence, theories, or findings, that's a legitimate, defensible legal position, and we've said so throughout this case. But confirming or denying whether a specific meeting happened on a specific date with specific terms isn't revealing evidence. It's just answering whether an administrative fact is true. Treating both of those as equally off-limits, under the same can't compromise the investigation umbrella, is where his critique actually lands hardest, and it's a fair one. He also raises something worth sitting with honestly. Distrust in an investigation doesn't require proof of wrongdoing to become a real, corrosive problem on its own. If a community stops trusting the process, regardless of whether the underlying investigation is actually being handled properly, that erosion of trust becomes its own separate obstacle to justice ever being accepted as legitimate, whatever the eventual outcome turns out to be. A prosecutor with 30 years of experience is telling you, directly, that silence in the face of a specific, unanswered claim is exactly what manufactures that kind of distrust, independent of whether anything improper actually happened. Now let's actually educate on what he's talking about when he describes the phone being downloaded into a computer program, because most of the public conversation around this has stayed vague on the actual mechanics, and it's worth understanding precisely. The tool he's referencing, Cellebrite, is one of the most widely used digital forensics platforms in law enforcement worldwide. It doesn't work by someone manually scrolling through a phone screen, tapping through photos and messages one at a time. It performs what's called a full logical or physical extraction, a complete, bit-for-bit copy of the device's data, pulled directly and mirrored onto a separate, secured system. Here's why that distinction actually matters for a case like this one. A full extraction captures far more than what's simply visible on the phone's screen. It can recover deleted content still sitting in unallocated storage space, metadata showing exactly when a file was created, modified, or removed, and a complete time-stamped record that doesn't depend on anyone's memory or account of what happened. Once that extraction is complete, both sides, the DA's office and the family's independent forensic team, can review the identical, complete dataset separately, each running their own analysis against the same underlying copy. Neither side has to trust the other's summary of what's on the phone, because both sides would have the actual data itself, not someone's description of it. That's exactly why the mutual inspection format both sides reportedly agreed to in July makes procedural sense, and it's also exactly why deviating from that agreed format, if that's actually what happened, would be a legitimate, specific concern, separate from anything else in this case. A joint single extraction, done once, with both sides present and both sides walking away with the complete mirrored data, is standard, defensible forensic practice. A demand for the phone to simply be surrendered outright, without that same joint process, isn't inherently improper on its own. Law enforcement has independent authority to collect evidence through proper channels. But if an actual agreement specifying a different, joint process already existed, walking away from it without a public explanation is precisely the kind of unforced error the former prosecutor is describing. It's worth understanding one more layer of this process, because it directly addresses a concern that's come up throughout this case: the risk of evidence being mishandled or altered after the fact. A proper Cellebrite extraction generates what's called a hash value, a unique digital fingerprint of the entire extracted dataset at the moment it's created. If that data is ever copied, transferred, or examined later, the hash value can be recalculated and compared against the original. If even a single bit of data has changed, the hash values won't match, and that mismatch is immediately, mathematically detectable. That's precisely the kind of built-in safeguard that should make a joint, properly documented extraction reassuring to both sides. Not just the family's team wanting independent access, but the DA's office too, since it protects the integrity of whatever the phone actually shows, regardless of which direction that evidence points. Here's the detective-grade stakes underneath all of this, and it's worth stating plainly. This phone likely contains the single most complete, objective time-stamped record of Nolan's final hours that exists anywhere, more reliable than any single person's memory, more precise than any second-hand account. There are also active allegations circulating publicly that evidence on that device may have been altered or deleted. A full forensic extraction is specifically designed to test exactly that claim. Deleted content often remains recoverable in unallocated storage for a meaningful window of time. The same technical reality we've covered elsewhere in this case. Getting that extraction done, promptly, by whatever process actually resolves it, isn't optional at this point. It's the single piece of evidence most capable of either confirming or closing out a meaningful share of the open threads in this entire case. There's a final piece of context worth adding here, because it's the actual weight behind why this specific delay matters as much as it does. Every other contradiction we've walked through across this entire video, the missing return footage, the shifting phone accounts, the dock moment nobody's explained, all of it exists in a kind of permanent uncertainty, specifically because the one piece of evidence capable of actually settling several of these questions at once has, according to this former prosecutor's own account, been sitting unresolved since July. A single, properly documented extraction wouldn't just answer the specific question of whether anything was deleted from Nolan's own phone. Depending on what it contains, it could independently corroborate or contradict pieces of nearly every timeline dispute this case has produced. Verdict: the former prosecutor's core argument holds up under real scrutiny. An unanswered formal letter making a specific factual claim isn't neutral, and there's a real, defensible distinction between protecting an investigation and simply correcting the public record on a scheduling dispute. The actual forensic process he's describing is standard, sound practice, capable of giving both sides confidence in the same complete data set. What's still missing is the thing his message is actually demanding: a direct, public accounting of whether that July agreement is being honored, and if not, why. If you were the DA hearing this message directly, what would actually stop you from just answering it? Yes, there was an agreement, or no, here's what actually happened.